generally speaking, legislatures have a much more broader, you and your colleagues would have a much broader realm of things you could put money toward. So in Virginia, for example, they put half of the money to low-income consumers and they put half of the money to infrastructure.
But my real concern is how do you endanger the benefits of RGGI when you start using these funds for really non-CO2 reduction purposes?
I see, that would be good.
That's the number of my question.
Thank you. Representative A. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Simple question, or simple, I hope, question. I'm listening to all the testimony and I'm not clear on what the source of these so-called proceeds might be. So where does the money come from?
So I mentioned about the quarterly auctions that a RGGI participating state would be participating in quarterly auctions. So RGGI's sort of an idea. RGGI Inc. is a 501c3 that supports this idea, but RGGI is an idea. And the idea is that you cap CO2 regionally, and then you take that cap, and there's an apportionment to each participating state. So Pennsylvania, if they were a participating state, would get an apportionment of that regional cap. The emissions in Pennsylvania being where they are, that I think the draft rate has them at 78 million. And that would be on the order of something like a total of 130 or 140 million. Maybe I'm getting that a little bit off, but a significant part of that. So the apportionment would go to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania would mint their own allowances, issue allowances, and sell them at auction, and the proceeds would come from the sale at auction. Whatever the auction price is, times the number of allowances sold, that's where the proceeds come from.
So businesses who generate the pollutants, if that's the right word, correct? It's not a direct tax on my constituents.
So the participants in the auctions, the bidders, compliance entities, those businesses that would be required, often participate in the auctions. Also, there's financial market players that participate in the auctions, and this is very important for the liquidity of the market. It also allows compliance entities not to necessarily have to participate in the auctions if they just want to buy allowances in the secondary market. So the bidders of that and the folks actually buying the allowances can be a variety of participants. But yeah, if you're a compliance entity, you need to have allowances to meet basically the right to put a ton of CO2 in the atmosphere. You need to buy an allowance to do that. That's the whole purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I believe I'm hearing and understanding is that this is going to be an additional cost to businesses, any way you cut it.
Thank you, Representative James. I would agree with that. Mr. McKeon, it's great to have you respond that you'd be here today, because I'm sure that you're aware that I sent you a letter as far back as January 14th of 2020, and the reply that I received back from you was this, one sentence. This is to acknowledge receipt of your letter and thank you for your interest in RGGI. So it was good to have you actually present some information here before us today that gave us a little more insight as to who RGGI is. And then we followed up, of course, on May 4th of this year with another letter that was signed by many members of this committee, actually the majority of the members of this committee. We've not received an answer back to that letter, even that you were in receipt of it. I would assume that you received it. Have you received the May 4th letter that we sent?
Yes, I did.
Because as you know from those letters, there's many of us that have a great concern, even though people affirmatively state that the governor has the authority and we'd be blocking it, as was testified to with the legislation that we've moved and another bill that just moved through the Senate, I believe with a veto-proof majority from that most recent vote in the Senate, that the governor doesn't have the authority to tax. I know that in your testimony you claim this is not a tax. Are you an attorney, sir, from your background?
No.
Thank you. Because we have had attorneys testify before the committee that have spelled out for us from clear court decisions in the past the difference between taxes and fees. And when we're collecting additional money from the pockets of businesses or taxpayers or ratepayers in Pennsylvania, it's above and beyond what's used to administer a program, then that's a tax. And that's the money that would then be redistributed, as I understand it. It was also interesting in your testimony that you kind of parse words with whether or not somebody joins as a participant. Immediately, when I heard that, from your testimony and kind of reviewed your testimony, of course, beforehand, because you'd sent it into us, which we appreciated. I think of after school sports, you don't tell your son or daughter that, I'm glad you're a participant in that sport, that you're not on the team. You don't participate and not join, you don't join and not participate. It's like kind of joining, participating. You also spelled out that it's not a compact, which I'm really curious, and I'm working on a letter to our congressional delegation to Congress, because as you know, Congress has to approve state compacts. States are not allowed to enter into compacts without congressional approval. So I understand why Reggie is offering that it's really not a compact, but it really seems to be functioning as a compact, seems to be a compact. So I'm not sure, if a duck, quacks, I think it's kind of a duck. So we're kind of interested in following up that end. And as you know, we've made the arguments in the letter to you that our governor does not have the authority and that litigation is expected. So have your participants been made aware of the letters that we've sent?
Yes, they've been shared with the agency heads.
So I would assume that they have liability in any potential lawsuit. Has that topic been taken up by the Reggie member states as far as Pennsylvania joining? And my understanding is there's not another state that's joined without legislative approval other than New York, which had been the creator of it, it sounds like, from Governor Pataki, who I certainly appreciated some of the work he'd done, but it seems like I don't appreciate this, which I just found out that he was ahead of it. But they have, I understand, their law gave broad approval to their executive branch to join something like this, but other states have taken legislative action to do so, which we have not, as you know. Has your board been made aware that Pennsylvania is trying to do something that's kind of an anomaly to what other participant or member states have done?
Well, based on your letter, there were discussions about this, and my understanding of the view of New York is that what Pennsylvania and the governor of Pennsylvania is doing vis-a-vis Reggie is very similar to and aligned with how New York approached this. New York basically said we have the right to DEC has the right to regulate air pollutants. CO2 is a pollutant. Greenhouse gases are considered pollutants, by the Supreme Court decision. Plus, they had state regulation in place. My understanding is Pennsylvania has state regulation in place, the 1960 Air Pollution Control Act, which allows for the regulation of air pollutants. So there's not a lot of difference there. I don't think what Pennsylvania is doing, it seems to be very different from what New York did. But I also think it should be understood that, and Franz, with the history that he has, he's helped me understand this better, that the states didn't feel they needed legislative authority to begin this participation. However, as he alluded to earlier, it makes it a lot easier to figure out what to do with the money if you have legislation that authorizes that. I don't know, am I saying?
Mike, that's okay. We're going to run out of time for this panel, but I do appreciate you coming today so I could ask you some of the questions. I want to make sure that you do receive my letters and that it's good to hear that the member states are aware that they're facing probably historic litigation along with a continued legislative battle, and I'm personally going to be calling on Congress to identify you all as a compact and shut you down. Thank you. Have a great day. Our next panel is going to be Mr. Mark Morano, Executive Director from Climate Depot, Dr. David Legates, University of Delaware, Professor, excuse me, we already had Dr. David Legates. We now have Dr. Patrick Michaels, climatologist, PhD Senior Fellow with the CO2 Coalition, and we also have Mr. Joe Bastardi, Chief Forecaster, Weatherbell Analytics, LLC, and we're going to lead off with Mr. Michaels.
morning. It's an honor.
Morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
An honor to present this committee. Am I on?
Little green light has to be on the,
There we go.
thank you, sir.
Green light is on and shining. I would like to address a larger issue here, which is the governor's executive order 2019-07, which was in response to something called the Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan of 2018. And I want to address two areas that are relatively simple, easy to understand. One, whether the Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan followed what we call best scientific practice. And number two, whether the emissions scenario, and we all have to make guesses, if you will, or informed guesses as to how much CO2 is going to go in the air in the next 5,200 years, 1,200 years, whether that scenario was correct. And finally, if I have time, I will go to the amount of warming that would be prevented if Michigan stopped all of its emissions 10 years ago. With regard to best scientific practices, the Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan relies upon computer models. And what they do is they look and, now how do I advance that forward?
I'll do it for you.
Two, please. There we go. What they do is they look at all the little colored spaghetti on that slide right there. That's the thin guys right in here. Oh, this is non-absorbing screen. That's nice. Anyway, and the solid red line is the average of all the computer models. And underneath that, beneath that, are the observations. This is in the tropics from 1979 to now. The observations include weather balloons, satellite data, and something called reanalysis of three-dimensional data in the atmosphere. They all look the same, and they look nothing at all like that colored spaghetti. But look carefully if you could, and I'm going to, because I can't get my thing to work, it's, when you look through the observed data, there's one model that works. Out of all 102, it probably need a special counselor because it is the Russian model that works perfectly. Now, in the real world, when the meteorologist in Ann Arbor makes the weather forecast for the region, he doesn't take all the weather forecast models, and they're 10 to 15, depending on how you count them, every day, average them up, and come up with a forecast. No, what he or she does is they look at the model or models that are working today for this particular weather situation. Maybe a developing low pressure system to the south of Michigan, and you know what that can do in the winter. So, best scientific practice is to use the model or models that work. Well, the Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan doesn't. It used all that colored spaghetti over there, weighted them equally, and came up, obviously, with a forecast that's far too warm. I recommend that you use the model that works, and one of the things we can do is we can adjust, I'll call it PCAP. We can adjust PCAP's forecast for the difference between the models they use, which is that colored spaghetti on the top of the picture, and the model that works, which is a single line of light spaghetti that goes through the data, courtesy of the Institute for Numerical Modeling from the Soviet Union. And that requires us to reduce the warming proportionally. PCAP and the governor's proclamation are based upon an assumption of 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit of warming from the year 2000 to the year 2050. Well, because the sensitivity of the Russian model is so much lower than the average sensitivity of the others, we have to reduce that warming by about 2.1 degrees, 2.2 degrees. So it drops from 5.4 to 3.2 degrees Celsius. Still warming, but not as much as it was. Now, here's the rub. PCAP used the wrong emissions scenario. They used a scenario called RCP 8.5, which stands for Representative Concentration Pathway 8.5. That says that 8.5 more watts per meter squared of radiation are downwelling onto the surface of the Earth. It is, according to the United Nations, according to everyone who's looked at it, the most extreme scenario for emissions. And in fact, I want to go forward, backward, forward, this is not the same slide, I guess. Okay, go backward and we'll come to it, otherwise I won't be able to work through it just verbally. Backward, backward, backward. Ah!